Thanks so much, Arlen, for having us, and thank you all for joining. As he mentioned, today we're here to do a training on fostering a systematic approach to family engagement, and it's facilitated by us, the After School for Children and Teens Now Coalition, or ACTNow. And I'll turn it over to Kasey to run through our agenda for today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Susan. So, as Susan mentioned, we're super excited for our topic today and have so much to share with you all. So, first, we're going to get started with our introductions and setting expectations for today's session. And then we're going to jump into our content with a look at what family engagement is and also its importance in both school and after school settings. From there, we'll dive into all things data and develop a clear understanding on the types of family engagement that there are, as well as how this data is collected. And lastly, we're going to spend some time focusing on the components of a successful family engagement system.
So before we kind of dive deep into the content for today, we want to just welcome you all and do some introductory norm setting. So to start off, again, my name is Susan Stanton. I am the network lead at ACTNow, and I use she, her pronouns.
And my name is Kasey Brown. I'm an after-school resources and support specialist for Teen Reach and RPSA with ACTNow, and I also use she, her pronouns. So as Susan mentioned, before we get started, we just kind of want to set the stage for our time together with a quick review of our norms. First things first, we ask that you all actively engage with us. As Arlen mentioned before, we are utilizing Zoom meetings, so we recognize this looks a little bit different than some normal webinars. But please don't be afraid to utilize the chat or come off of mute with us today. We want to ensure that we're providing one another with respect and actively listening, as we all have unique experiences and perspectives and knowledge to share with one another. And lastly, please don't be afraid to utilize all the features that Zoom has to offer. So whether that's sharing with us in the chat, taking yourself off of mute, or using those reaction buttons available.
In terms of learning objectives for today, one of the main things that we're going to focus on in our first part of our time today is really defining the benefits of family engagement, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, but also why we need a data-driven system for family engagement. Then we're also going to identify a model of evaluation that aids in your tracking of family engagement to help you to continuously improve. And finally, we're going to leave some time today for an interactive section where you can work on planning for a family engagement model and planning next steps for yourself. So before we dive into things, we want to take a quick minute to break the ice and have you all introduce yourselves so that way we know who is on the call. So if you could take a minute right now in the chat and type in your name, either your organization or your district, and why you think it's important for you to be here today. So we're going to give folks a few minutes to start adding this information into the chat for us. And don't forget to answer the question, why do you think it's important for you to be here today?
We have quite a few folks in the chat who have stated they're looking to continuous learning, learning more effective approaches to family and community engagement, improving parent outreach, to support and foster family engagement with our students' families. Absolutely. Thank you all so much for sharing. Please keep dropping those in the chat for us. Attendance has been low at these events this year, so looking for ideas to increase attendance at events, of course. It's important to engage with multilingual families to ensure that we're reaching our engagement goals. Absolutely, that is a huge component, that communication piece in family engagement for sure. To develop a stronger family engagement system, to increase knowledge and support families. These are all wonderful. Thank you so much for dropping these in the chat for us. All right. All right, thank you all so much for dropping those in the chat and sharing with us. So for those of you who aren't familiar with ACTNow, we are a statewide coalition that advocates for quality and affordable after-school programs for youth throughout Illinois. So we partner with educators like yourselves, program providers, community advocates, youth organizations, and policymakers to ensure that youth have access to high quality out of school time programming throughout the state. So before we jump in even further with today's content, we want to learn a little bit more about your understanding of out of school time programming. So we went ahead and put a Mentimeter on the screen. And if you aren't familiar with Menti, it's a really cool interactive tool that we like to use to engage with our audience. So we'd like you to access this Menti, which I'll share on the screen, and answer the question for us. What comes to mind when you hear the phrase out of school time programming? So you can go ahead and scan that QR code, but I am also going to go ahead and drop in the chat the code as well as the link to join that Menti. And you all will be able to access that. So once again, our question for you all is, what comes to mind when you hear out of school time programming?
And Kasey, just to let you know, I used the QR code and it took me to a different question. What family engagement data does my program currently collect? So maybe avoid the QR code and use the number code.
Oh, I apologize for that. That's a tech issue on my part, folks. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and just use that code that we dropped in the chat. Thank you all so much for letting me know. Yes. And if you have trouble accessing that Menti, please feel free, if you'd like to take yourself off mute and answer that question, or go ahead and drop your answer in the chat, please feel free to do so. So we have some responses rolling in, opportunities for students and their families to engage in educational learning experiences, after school events, after school programs, after school programming to enhance learning and provide opportunities of building relationships.
Hi. Good, how are you?
After school, I think of after school care, like latchkey workshops, art, music, help with homework, socializing, clubs and activities that my staff come up with for students to participate in, clubs for students, education opportunities for parents, optional program to help connect with school and staff, workshops, after school, and after school programs to provide enrichment and help with homework, daycare, clubs and activities, ways to build positive community with students, families, extension activities, connecting with community resources, enrichment opportunities, after school events, clubs, activities, support groups, athletics, fine arts, parent affinity spaces, etc. After school arts programs, so clubs, activities, tutoring, parent engagement workshops. These are all really great responses. Recreation opportunities outside of school hours, clubs, community ed activities, enrichment, intervention, daycare, extra help within school is great. An opportunity for both parents and students. Such programs provide enrichment opportunities. After school programs, parent workshops, helping with fundraisers, concert setups, volunteer before and after, parent workshops, parent engagement, community enrichment, parent workshops. These are all spot on. Absolutely. Parent workshops to engage in what parents would need or interested in community bilingual parent support. Absolutely, yes. Thank you all so much for answering that question for us. And so I am going to go ahead and share with you all just a quick how we define after school and out of school time programming. So after school and out of school time programs are opportunities that take place before school, after school, and during summer break. Like many of you all said in that mentee, there are enrichment opportunities and experiences that are provided for youth and families, and these are vital to positive youth development. Some of these include school day learning support, such as tutoring and homework assistance, social, emotional, and life skills development, positive adult mentorship, and so much more. So we do like to note that after school programs vary depending on several things, which include how they are funded and where they are located. So we can think about an after school program that is in a rural environment versus in an urban environment, the resources that are offered by those programs, as well as the setting. So me personally, I work with grantees in a multitude of settings, which include community-based after-school programs, as well as school-based after-school programs.
So now we're going to take some time to define family engagement, and we're going to do another mentee to kind of hear what you think family engagement means and looks like. And so I will put the link in the chat one more time. Again, ignore the QR code, and you can use that link to get to the mentee meter. And we want to ask you all, how do you define family engagement? And I'm going to give folks about 30 seconds to put in their responses. I'm seeing some folks kind of struggling to think of it and define it because it's not happening in their district, and other folks thinking about how you are involving families in their school day education and learning as well. I'm also seeing people expanding that beyond just involving families in learning and more just involving them any way with their children that has to do with the school building. Kasey, do you want to scroll down just a little bit? Thank you. I love what somebody said about connecting families in a way that honors their voice. I agree that family engagement should be about empowering your families and not about like imperialistic leadership where we're telling them what's what and what to do. I agree that it should really be an empowering process. And there's some people who are quantifying it by their family engagement activities, like holding events or emails or phone calls home. And we're definitely going to talk about all those things because all those little steps are really important to add up. I love the idea of parent surveys as well, asking parents what they want to see, getting their feedback. Somebody also mentioned trust and relationships. It's going to be very hard to get family engagement off the ground without those relationships. Those are all really helpful. We're going to transition back to our slides. So you all have a lot of these different kind of foundational concepts that go into family engagement. I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about how we define family engagement. You can go to the next slide. The term family, when we use it in this training, and we'll also share resources later on, we have a family engagement toolkit that we love to use with programs. But when we talk about the family, it refers to the caregivers present in a child's life. So caregivers could include a parent, like a mother or father, but it also includes your aunts, your uncles, your grandparents, cousins, older siblings, neighbors, guardians, anyone who's invested and supportive of the growth and development of that child. Family engagement relies on the core assumption that all families are committed to and invested in supporting their child. So we don't enter into family engagement with any preconceived notions about how much that parent wants to be there. We all are going to enter into it with the assumption that everyone wants to show up in the ways that they can. Additionally, all relationships between families and programs must be based in trust, where families of all cultures, ethnicities, and backgrounds are included, and that they're all treated as equal members in a child's learning process. I think it's always important to frame ourselves on the importance of family engagement because it's not easy. A lot of you mentioned that it's not easy and that you've had a lot of struggles. But when you do it well and when you continue to focus on it as a goal and make incremental changes and improvements, it does pay off in spades for both youth and families. Families play a unique and important role in a child's academic, social, emotional, and behavioral development. The family members and caregivers are a child's first and most important teachers. So including them in your after-school programs and summer programs has not only been shown to benefit children, but also their families. So we encourage you to take time to develop these relationships with families and allow program providers to learn about families' diverse experiences and needs, whether it's through one-on-one conversation, family-focused events, or resource sharing. Because effective family engagement strategies can ensure that families have the skills and resources necessary to support and advocate for their children long after they leave the program. So not only will you see benefits for your youth, like improved behavior and academic achievement, but families are going to also feel more empowered to share themselves with you and to show up and help you and their children moving forward. Now that we have a good frame of reference for what we mean by family engagement, what it looks like, what it feels like, we want to talk a little bit about understanding the importance of collecting family engagement data. That's why we're here to talk today about systems and data collection. It isn't new to you all that we should evaluate our family engagement programs and practices and efforts. We all know that in order to continue improving and expanding upon our work, that we need to evaluate and monitor how we're doing. So sometimes our data collection measures are only quantitative, such as number of parents that came to an event or the number of permission slips we got back. However, evaluation of the quality of a program and evaluating your current efforts might mean more than just those quantitative pieces. And it might be hard to define to get those qualitative pieces. But in this next section, we're going to work together to understand the types of family engagement data you can collect, why we need to collect it, and the importance surrounding it, and demonstrate resources that will aid in this effort. Before we dive a little bit deeper into the data collection piece, I also just want to ground us in, again, why the data is so important. Our organization launched after-school quality standards several years back, and similar to how school day teachers have standards, we have used them in the out-of-school time space. They were developed with researchers and evaluators and programs and state agencies, and they're all research-based and backed. But one of the things we found interesting is that year over year, being able to have a system of family engagement was always the area of the quality standards where people ranked the lowest. And that's why we started developing resources to particularly target this need. We hear from people all the time at different schools and programs that they're doing family engagement. They bought in, they found it was important, but they're still struggling to get it going. And that's why we've really encouraged people to take more of a data-driven approach to family engagement. We don't want it to just be one-off. We want it to be something that's tracked ongoing, even if you have staff turnover, which I know we've all experienced. So that's why we have found that it's really important to ground this work in being data-driven. And that seems to be, oftentimes when we work with districts and programs, the key element that's missing in their family engagement work. And the thing that's holding them back is they're not tracking it and looking at very carefully what's working and what's not working, and then leaning into those findings. I will turn it over to Kasey to talk about some of the types of family engagement data we look at.
Thank you so much, Susan. So yes, as Susan mentioned, in order for us to understand the importance of collecting family engagement data, we first have to look at the different types that there are. So when we're tracking family engagement and reviewing data, observing and recognizing patterns is crucial to decision making, as it informs us of the success and the challenges that are occurring in our engagement methods. So here on the screen, we have a couple of different types of data that can be collected. For example, event attendance. You may ask, how do we gauge the success of an event? That can include, questions that can be asked are, is the data collected for this event based on those who RSVP'd for the event or those who actually attended and completed a post-event survey? In terms of communication, we want to figure out, is there a communication method that is proven to garner more success when trying to connect with parents or families? And in this case, we can say that phone calls are that communication method. From there, asking, does the data reflect how many phone calls staff members made, including voicemails that they left? Or are we only going to track calls in which someone answered the phone for us? In terms of resources, are we tracking all of the resources that have been shared with families? Or is the success going to be measured by how many families actually utilize the resources that were shared? And finally, participation in decision making. So an example of this could be collaborating with a family to discuss a student's behavior in class. Does the data that we're collecting only track that initial conversation that we have with those families, or are we also going to count additional check-ins that we have as well? Oops, I'm sorry, y'all. All right. And I'm going to pass it along to Susan to lead us in our next mentee.
So again, I'm going to put the link for that in the chat so you can just click on that. But what we're curious to know from you is what is the data that your district already has at its disposal for family engagement? So we're going to do a quick poll on that, and I'll give folks, there's about 48 of you on, so I'd like to see it at least half, maybe 2/3 of you tell us what type of family engagement data does your school currently collect? This is great. I mean, it sounds like a lot of you are tracking the events attendance, which is awesome. And that is definitely a great place to start. And we find that when we work with different districts and programs, that is one of the main areas that they're collecting. And that's one of the things that are easier to report on to your fund, to different, title funding or things of that nature. It is very hard to accurately track your frequency of communication via email, text, etc. We do have example trackers for that, but I would encourage you to really move the needle in that section, because that is kind of where we sometimes see these gaps in communication, is that we aren't tracking those things. So we don't know if everyone is having the same issue with the same family and unable to get through, or maybe there is one person who does have a great relationship and that can be leveraged as an asset. So making sure that you're setting up a system to track those things is really helpful. But one of the things that I wanted to kind of point out from what Kasey shared from some of those questions before is like thinking about how do you kind of one up yourself and use this data. So if you find that sending emails, people aren't responding to you, and it's really all about texting, what tools are you leveraging there? Is there a mass text software that you have access to or that you can look into if text messages are what's getting you a better response? So it helps you kind of really think through how you communicate and when you communicate. But also if you're looking at things like attendance of events, obviously leaning into the areas where attendance was higher in those subjects. And then again, family interest surveys are incredibly impactful to making sure that you're staying kind of on message. But one of the things I will say that's incredibly important that it's not exactly captured here that Kasey brought up too, is this idea of, like, again, these consistent pieces of communication that are really tough to track. And we'll share a sample tracker for that in a minute. But thinking about who answered and when, and what resources were given to that family. And then maybe you start to see a trend bubble up, like multiple families have requested food scarcity resources or housing resources. And that really is actually the crux of the learning issue I'm seeing in class. And so when you're able to start compiling the frequency of the communication with the results of it across classrooms and across your school, that's when we really see people start to move the needle, because then you have relationships with those folks and they come to your events and they respond to surveys and they come to the family events and the conferences. And so that's really where things start.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, like Susan mentioned, there is a multitude of ways in which this data can be collected. There is no right way to collect this family engagement data. As you can see on this slide here, data can be collected in a variety of ways, including family surveys. I believe on the last slide we had those check-ins as well as conferences. You can utilize family communication logs. So data collection tends to vary for several reasons, including the capacity of staff, as well as the engagement methods that we're collecting data for. For example, data collection for phone calls will look different for tracking event attendance. So later on in this session, we'll talk a little bit more about how recognizing the capacity for your staff goes hand in hand with data collection. So we recognize that the school day passes by in a flash, and oftentimes we find things such as data collection are placed on the back burner. But we do want to highlight that remembering that data collection and review is just as crucial to family engagement as those face-to-face interactions that you are having with families, both in and out of school. Data drives decision-making, and when we have the chance to collect and analyze our data, we're able to determine if the activities and services that are being implemented in the intended way. And if the data does not meet our expectations, the information that we gather can be used to determine the necessary steps to address the issues that we're encountering with that engagement. And if the data does correspond with a school or program's vision for engagement, it can help us see the activities and services that are helping to accomplish our overarching goals, and if other adjustments can be made to better meet the needs of those that we are serving. Data also communicates the impact of programming in a measurable form and can help schools and programs demonstrate to their community as well as policymakers how they are making a difference in the lives of youth. Data informs program leaders on not only the development of programming, but also the ways in which resources are being allocated. And finally, we also collect data because it attests to the validity and credibility of programs, ultimately marketing these programs as effective.
An essential component of family engagement is ensuring that communication and the use of strong communication strategies are present in your work. Positive communication is maybe the most powerful tool that staff can use with families. Good communication helps to inform, reassure, and engage those families and build those relationships. A single conversation, if it's positive or negative, can set the tone for a family's opinion of classroom staff or your school in general. So it's important to emphasize effective and welcoming communication. Communication and engagement support the development of learning and families' children, strengthens their competence as parents, and provides a source of comfort and support in times of real need. So within your school, there should be a specific plan as to how to engage families throughout the year. Through families' participation, in voluntary events, it is your job to make them feel welcome by actively encouraging involvement. So program activities should reflect the family's interests and motivate them to participate. In addition, programs may have different family involvement committees, and this committee could be composed of family members who encourage communication and involvement with the goal of strengthening and supporting the well-being of children. We've always find having parents leading the family engagement or families leading the family engagement to be an incredibly strong strategy, because they will feel invested in the success of your work and want to involve other families if they're going to be volunteering and spending their time to improve the well-being of their schools. They're going to be invested in making sure others come and that work is a success. And you'll also know that your work is really a reflection of your school community. A strong partnership between staff and families is built on positive communication. So you want to make sure that you have accurate information is shared, that expectation is shared, and that trust is established. And making sure that not only you, but your entire community is on board with what that looks like and what your families need is incredibly important. Now, one of the fun resources I'm going to share with you all, and I'll drop the link to it in the chat, and it'll also go out with the slides from today, is a link to a resource we developed recently, and you can click on the link to see this tracker right away. We just encourage you to make a copy of it if you plan to use it and not make edits directly in this Google document. But this is, we have found that working with other districts in the past, depending on what type of software you're using, whether or not you're a Google district, I find that Google Sheets is really easy to use in between classrooms or throughout the school or throughout an out of school time program. And this is some of the types of things we encourage you to track, setting up things by week, whether people, can name the youth, who they spoke to, what the interaction was, the length of contact, reason for contact. You can do things in a narrative format like we've described here, or you could try to make them a drop-down menu. So that way it's easier and faster to track too, like called home to discuss grades, called home to discuss behavioral incident, called home to congratulate or check in, if you feel like that is faster. I think what's important to keep in mind for something like this is it would be very, very difficult to start using it and having every single teacher in your building filling it out every single day. But if you were to, I think it's important about starting somewhere with your data collection too. Some data is better than no data. So encouraging people to, even if they could just once a week, write down any contact with family is a really great place to start. So if everyone starts to make that commitment and grows over time, getting the data, you'll see that your teams are more invested in that data and more invested in using it. So I would just like to make sure I highlight that it's not about perfection with this. It's about trying to start with somewhere for your data collection, but then having those more consistent connections where you spoke to somebody via email, or you texted or phone called, or had a conference via Zoom, starting to gauge those things and then being able to share time, as Kasey said, to really go over what you're working on and what you've heard from families is a really great place to start that cycle of continuous quality improvement. So we've talked a little bit about, we have that frame of mind now for what family engagement is, and we know the importance of the data collection and the importance of family engagement. And we started talking a little bit about what that data collection could look like, and what that would mean for your schools as well. So now we're going to talk a little bit about developing a family engagement framework system that works for you, personalizing it to your needs and your context. So successful family engagement, like we said from the beginning, is systematic, and it's the driving force of why we're here today. It's ongoing, it's continuous, it's reflective. You are using your data, both quantitative and qualitative, to drive your decision-making. This framework that we have up here on the slide reflects the different components that you need of a successful family engagement system. This should be, in these systems, you should include a commitment from the people around you, making sure that you're on the same page, making sure that your leadership is bought in and that they have the capacity and the support needed in order to get this family engagement system off the ground. It's also important to think expansively about family engagement and not just think through how this affects teachers, but really a greater system of community partnership. How are you involving after school programs? How are you involving other meaningful folks in your students' lives? And then also accountability, thinking about how are we going to not only collect this data and all work together, but how are we going to hold ourselves accountable and continue to reflect on what's working well and what's not working well.
Thank you, Susan. So this is we're going to wrap up today's session talking a little bit more in depth about each of these components. And then I'll also share a little bit with you all about a resource that we're going to provide following this that goes into how you can build out a family engagement system or tracker that best works for you all. So with these components of a family engagement system, the first that we have, as Susan mentioned, is a commitment, to family engagement. So this includes a shared vision amongst program leaders, school faculty and staff, and families that is integrated into existing program structures and new policies and practices that are being established. Next, we have leadership. So effective partnerships are created when leadership sets the tone and expectations for meaningful relationships with families, and support that is adaptable is prioritized for all. These relationships are recognized as a shared responsibility. So we all recognize that this is not the job of just one person. This is not just the responsibility of our school staff. It's up to everyone to ensure that these relationships feel meaningful and equitable. Capacity building is a crucial component of a successful family engagement system. So many administrators, teachers, and support staff enter the field with little to no training on how to engage with families. So therefore, it's super important and necessary to train and provide opportunities for personnel and parents to increase their capacity to work together. Next, community partnership. Community organizations can be a critical resource in supporting student learning and healthy development. So research shows that community-based support programs that are family-centered increase parent self-efficacy and competence. And because of this, several community organizations and districts are increasingly partnering together to leverage their resources to not only address student learning and healthy development, but also promote family engagement. As a result of these efforts, families are more connected to both schools and these community organizations, and efforts are more coordinated across the board. So research is revealing that the community schools model specifically has increased family engagement and has improved student learning and attendance, behavior, and development. And lastly, of these components, there is accountability. So in order for family engagement efforts to have the greatest impact and to ensure sustainability, strategies for collecting and analyzing family engagement data must be part of the processes for continual and ongoing improvement. Not only does program and school leadership and staff need to have access to the data that is being collected, but they also need to have the capacity to use family engagement data in a meaningful way. So that was, we just focused on—
Kasey, can I just share one last thing before we get to reflection questions? So I also want to share another resource with you all, and I mentioned it earlier in our presentation, is this family engagement toolkit. And I'm going to put the link to it in the chat box as well. This was written specifically for out of school time programs, such as summer and after school programs. We definitely have a lot of school day partners that use it as well. This is really kind of a soup to nuts guide of family engagement as well that you can continue to bring back to and use with your teams. It goes over some of these definitions that we've talked about, and it talks about evaluating your current process and identifying your goals for the future. There's a really good brainstorming tool at the back of this toolkit as well to kind of walk you through that process of where you are and where you're going. And then it also dives a little bit deeper into creating your plan for moving forward. And kind of walk you through all the steps of that and what that could look like. It also provides different specific examples of effective family engagement ideas and strategies. One of the things that might be really helpful is thinking about how you're building relationships with families and then community partners as well, and what that looks like. There's also a sample family engagement timeline for what to do throughout the year, how to connect with folks, and then also how to do professional development for your staff on family engagement. And then finally, there's this idea of sustaining your family engagement and moving it forward as well too. And so lots of great resources that you can then implement directly into your program, like sample letters, sample surveys, ideas for events and things of that nature. And so that is a really good reference point for you to come back to afterwards. And then to kind of continue to keep revisiting as you're starting to think about how to make your family engagement more data driven.
Thank you for sharing that resource out. And as we mentioned before, we're going to make sure we include all of these materials once again, along with the slide deck following today's presentation. So we have reached the end of today's session, but before we wrap up, we'd just like to take an opportunity to reflect with you all. So either sharing in the chat, or if you feel comfortable taking yourself off mute, we'd love to hear from you what some of your main takeaways from today's session are, and how you feel that you can implement some of those components into a family engagement system.
So feel free to put in the chat, what is one takeaway that you will take away from today's session?
Yes, so some data is most certainly better than none. Documenting that data, absolutely. Yes, family engagement does come in many shapes and sizes, absolutely. I see a lot of documentation on here, for sure.
Well, and also just know that being data driven can be fun. I know there's this one school district I worked with that instead of just doing the regular old survey of what parents want to see next, they did it at their open house night, and they had jars and different colored beads. And so as parents came into the session, they put their beads in the jar and they voted to make it interactive. I know that COVID and germs sometimes have changed some of those things for us, but if you can find ways to make your data collection more fun and riveting for folks, and while still getting that information back, I do think that there's lots of creative ways that I've seen districts do things like that too.
I saw someone drop in the chat, starting small. Absolutely. Like Susan mentioned before, you don't want to, sometimes it's easier to start on a weekly basis as opposed to a daily basis, and kind of get that engagement in, and getting staff invested in that data collection piece is really important. So thank you all so much for dropping those in the chat for us.
And we'll keep looking at those for a minute, but if you have any questions for us as well, we're open to those. If you have any questions for us about any of the tools or resources we shared, or just kind of general thoughts or questions about family engagement, we're here for that as well.
Yeah, feel free to unmute your microphone, ask a question in chat. Any way you would like to engage with Kasey and Susan would be great. We will take your questions now. Awesome. Thanks, Kimberly. I appreciate that.
I have one question. We have a lot of family engagement from our kindergarten, first grade families. How do we continue that engagement with our middle school families?
Yeah, I think that it's similar to what we see kind of in like even just the enrichment space, right? For younger kids and older kids, you know, sometimes you'll see that as kids get older, you'll see a drop off in engagement and enrichment activities. So it kind of makes sense that you might see the same thing with the families too, that there might be that drop off. We always find that means that there must have been like a change in interest, and in some ways, that they're looking to engage with you in a different way than they were when they were younger. And I think that's the same for the students. A first grader doesn't want to attend the same after school program that your sixth grader does. You have to learn and grow with them and really lean into what their needs are and impact. And I think as both students if you get older, and then also as our parents have older students, really about empowering them more and take a leadership role with it too, I think is always incredibly effective. I know for myself as a young mom with a young kid, I felt really clueless about what was going on, but I would hope and imagine that as my student gets older, I would feel more empowered and ready to go to be involved with my school in a way that I needed really people to give me that information for younger grades. But as older grades happened, I was more prepared to take that lead and to step in. And so I think it's about re-engaging in what those needs would be, because your need as a parent with a preteen or a teenage youth are different than what you're going to need as a younger youth. And then also let's lean into their parental expertise and make sure that we're like leveraging that and maybe even using them as an asset for our younger grades as well too, and really empowering them to take ownership of your family engagement. So in some ways, I think that there's similar strategies to family engagement for older youth that you probably use to engage just the youth themselves in those older grades. Yes, I agree. Kimberly wrote in the chat, and tapping into family funds of knowledge. Oh man, I've seen the most interesting family engagement events happen when you tap into that. You know, whether it's thinking about grocery shopping and then recipe building within a certain community. So like knowing where in your local grocery store, where to find groceries to make events and to make meals, and doing that in a culturally sensitive way. I've seen people talk through ingredients that you might find in Mexico, but you can't find them in the US, and what those substitutions are. And families like loved events like that. I think food-based things are always incredibly impactful, but we've obviously seen sewing, we've seen community gardens, we've seen people who are accountants within a school come in to help do kind of info sessions on financial planning and talking about getting your income taxes in and things of that nature. So there's always tons of different assets to leverage within your family community. And the only other thing I would mention too is it's not only about leaning into interest and empowering them, but also thinking through reducing barriers for family engagement, whether those barriers might be childcare for siblings that are at home, language barriers, and sometimes it's just about a level of comfort. There are some students who feel uncomfortable walking into a school every day and the formality of it still. And there's some parents who feel that way, and they might carry some of that past trauma about not having felt successful as a student or not feeling welcomed in the past. And so making sure that your environment's really welcome and that you're reducing those barriers for families is also incredibly important. Are there other questions or thoughts people had that I might be able to be a little helpful with? Seeing lots of great ideas and examples in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing those. Excellent. Kasey, I'll turn it over to you if you want to wrap us up then.
Thank you. I forgot I was muted for a second. Awesome. All right. So to wrap us up, first and foremost, we would really like to thank you all for your engagement today with us for this presentation. So to wrap us up, we'd like to share with you a quick eval. I promise that this QR code works. So our goal here at ACTNow is to provide not only relevant but quality trainings and workshops, and we do this through evaluation and feedback. So if you could please just take a moment to complete this evaluation. I'll go ahead and drop the link in the chat as well for you all to let us know what you found to be valuable from today's session, and also ways that we can improve in the future. There it is. So yes, we will just give you a couple moments to complete that, and we truly appreciate it. So as I said before, we truly thank you for your time and your engagement today, and we hope that you found the information shared in today's presentation to be useful for you all as well as your team. If you have any questions, we can stay on for another minute or so, as well as I've listed my contact information here on the screen, so please don't hesitate to reach out. As I mentioned, we will be providing this slide deck as well as the materials and documents that we shared in follow-up with you all as well.
Wonderful,
Susan,
Kasey. Oh, go ahead.
nope, sorry, I was just noting that Susan also dropped her email in the chat for you all as well if you all have any questions.
Perfect. Well, Susan, Kasey, thank you both so much for sharing these amazing strategies and resources for family engagement. As I mentioned in the beginning, we did record the webinar. I'll be sending out the link to the recording tomorrow, as well as I will send out the slide deck as a PDF. Kasey, you'll send me that, I'm assuming. And hopefully send me links to the other resources that you shared as well, the Google Doc and the Family Engagement Toolkit. I'll make sure that everybody has access to those when they get the webinar recording as well.
That would be perfect. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all. Feel free to type your thank yous into chat. If you hover at the lower right corner of your screen, you'll see a big red leave button. You are free to exit the session now, and we hope to see you on our next ELN live event. Thanks, everyone.